We love games that harken back to the 90s, like games with pixel art, RPGs, Metroidvanias, and 2D platformers. And then there's Cuphead. It taps into the subversive and surreal elements of Slashy Studio cartoons like Popeye and Bebop of the 1930s, but it also borrows the niche bullet hell subgenre of the run-and-gun side-scrollers, where the players have to dodge an uncomfortable amount of enemy projectiles and show enough skill to dodge and to react to enemy attacks. These two different forms of design choices came together to make Cuphead. So, this is Players Know 2, I'm Vamsy, and here's how Cuphead does nostalgia desperately. The one thing that we fondly remember about old cartoons is their rubber hose animations and the wacky stuff they could do. Cuphead embodies this style and adheres to the 24 frames our rose-tinted eyes are used to, but it makes the gameplay in 60 frames per second so it feels smooth, which certainly helps in a game like Cuphead. This way, there's no particular game that we can harken back to and yet still feel the memory of a yesteryear game. Pixel art and other games have to contend with the original games like Contra and Adventure Island, but they feel better in our heads than they actually are. Cuphead subverts most of these trappings as it has an aesthetically fresh look, yet still be old-fashioned like the 1930s. It also lends itself to outlandish ideas like these two frogs who can turn into a slot machine, this woman turning into a raging bull, and then a gigantic moon that summons UFOs. Mental. This means Cuphead's gameplay is not limited by the subject at hand, thereby letting a good boss design influence its animation and vice versa. The jazz soundtrack and the slapstick sound effects certainly sell the feel of nostalgic cartoons we used to watch, like when this frog rolls and claps. From the nostalgic grainy sound of interference that plays through the loading screen, to the bold sonic personality of each of the bosses, everything fits so well, which is unlike anything we've seen or heard in video games. Oh, and the game's notorious difficulty stems from the boss rush battles who pretty much take the center stage in Cuphead. You don't get to manually save, which in itself is a throwback to the arcade game design where games were made intentionally difficult to keep you playing. And there's no auto health recovery or a health regain system, which means every little mistake gets you closer to death, and you'll have to start all over again. This might seem frustrating to some modern gamers, but it's what makes the genre shine. It also uses a modern engine to make you play immediately, instead of making you wait with a loading screen, thankfully, which is unlike the old NES games. The only way to get through the game is to actually learn the boss attacks and skillfully maneuver and dodge while shooting at them. Each boss has a set of attacks they randomly choose from, and each attack may vary in timing. This potato does this normal attack in slow and a fast way. This flower spawns its vines under 2 of 3 platforms, but you don't know which 2 platforms it's going to attack through. Animations are designed to get the player's attention so they clearly know an enemy's telegraph, like this grave that leans behind to show his base before he slams onto the ground. Almost all enemies have different animations for their attacks. It makes you juggle multiple things at once, where you have to react to an enemy's attack and dodge, but also keep an eye on other smaller enemies. Let's see how all this plays out in a boss battle. In Carnival Kerfuffle, you fight Beppy the Clown. In the first phase, you have to shoot at him, and also these ducks toward his dash attack, which is both seen and heard, where he leans back and honks before the attack. But some of these ducks have an explosive bottle, which explodes on contact, and others can be parried to build your bonus and deal more damage. In phase 2, a roller coaster whizzes past the screen every other minute, which is telegraphed, but you also have to avoid the balloon dogs and the people in the car. After which, Beppy gets on a horse on either side of the screen in a yellow horse, which this attack pattern, or a green horse, which has this pattern. Oh, you also have to dodge them while avoiding the roller coaster again. In the final phase, the boss will transform into a merry-go-round, and the roller coaster is now sped up. And he spits out these tiny enemies who throw baseballs at you, but they jump as they start their attack, which should catch the player's attention. So in these battles, your reaction and skill is critical to outlast them rather than upgrading your weapon or getting a new armor set and breezing through them. This sort of difficulty is entirely different from what we've seen in most AAA games, where players are given a vague idea of a difficulty option to select and play from. The new God of War is a good example of how not to do a harder difficulty, where enemies just become bullet sponges instead of dealing more damage. It did have enemies level up at half health, so I do have to give props for that. So yes, Cuphead borrows from two different mediums for its nostalgic game design and pays homage to both in a satisfying way. It took a unique visual art style which was mostly used in cartoons and mirrored it with mechanics of a run-and-gun game. It's a great example of how to draw inspiration from other mediums and not just old games. Hey, thanks for watching, subscribe if you want to support my channel, and let me know what your favourite boss is in the comment section below. Sure.